Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's CFO Leadership Council program, the CFO Agenda for 2024. We're honored that you're here with us today, and a special thanks to Oracle NetSuite, today's exclusive webcast sponsor. My name is Emily Boissonneau from the CFO Leadership Council, and I'll be facilitating today's session. And a quick shout out to my team member, Nancy Ellers, who's working her magic behind the scenes. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Your lines are muted. However, we do encourage all of your questions. Please type them in the questions area and I'll ask them on your behalf during the Q&A portion at the end. Today's program qualifies for 1 CPE. In order to receive credit, you must be a current CFO Leadership Council member and answer all 4 polling questions. Also, when you sign off today, a quick survey will pop up. Please rate your experience as your honest feedback helps us reach further. If you are not a current CFO-LC member and are interested, let's connect. Annual membership gets you instantly connected with 2,000 peers and includes CFO Connect, our online members-only forum, our mentorship program, and more. Learn more by downloading our membership fact sheet available in the handout section of this platform. We do also have NetSuite's 2024 CFO Agenda Business Guide in the handout section, so be sure to check that out. Registration is open for our 2024 Spring Conference at the Westin Boston on June 4th through the 6th, as well as our Fall Conference. So please register early to get the best rates and you'll be inspired by world-class experts. Lastly, do follow us online for the latest council and industry news. In addition to our national programs like this one, we have chapter events and socials at each of our 31 chapters. For the latest, check out our full calendar online. Now on to the big reason we've gathered. We are joined by 2 very special guests. So it's my pleasure to hand the mic over to Megan O'Brien and Ian McHugh from Oracle NetSuite.
Perfect.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Really excited to be here with Megan and to share hopefully some insights as we kind of start a new year here that will hopefully, help you start the new year on the right foot and give you some ideas for what you should be focusing on this year, and perhaps refresh some things that you knew about but just haven't thought about in a little bit. All right, so I'm Ian McHugh. I'm a senior content marketing manager here at Oracle NetSuite. I've been here for about 6 years. And as part of my job, I talk to a lot of customers, business leaders across finance and kind of supply chain operations roles. So that, of course, includes CFOs, controllers, finance VPs, all those people and many of those roles that I know the audience is in today. And also a lot of just industry experts across, various areas. Some of those things like finance and supply chain, as well as other areas. That includes people internally at NetSuite, as well as a lot of external people as well. And as part of my role, I just write about a lot of the challenges that businesses are facing right now. What are the trends, the changes, the things that kind of are affecting their day-to-day, and what are they doing to address those? And that's especially in the finance function, right? What are the things affecting finance today, and how are companies responding to them? Obviously, part of that is explaining kind of how NetSuite applications play a role in helping resolve those, but my work certainly extends beyond just talking about our technology and all the cool stuff it can do. Before this, I was in a similar role at a supply chain software company, and I started my career out in journalism before kind of moving into this marketing and tech space. And with that, I'll let Megan introduce herself.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ian. All right, so appreciate the intro. I'm Megan O'Brien, and I am the business and finance editor here at Oracle NetSuite. So I cover the latest trends and strategies for CFOs. I'm also the co-host of the NetSuite podcast with Ian. And prior to this, I worked as a content creator for Deloitte. And during my time there, I worked with the C-suite programs with a focus on CFO offerings. I then moved on to work for the Deloitte Global CEO's communications team, which involved a lot of research and publishing that research at events like the World Economic Forum in Davos. All right, so today we have a jam-packed agenda. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but we are going to cover several major themes throughout the presentation: automating the fundamentals, AI and other technologies, emerging regulations, some forward-facing practices, and how to empower your teams. We will finish up with some final thoughts and a Q&A, so be sure to bring any questions that you might have. And then we have a couple poll questions throughout the presentation, so if you're going for CPE credit, be sure to keep an eye out for those. Before we dive in, let's go ahead and take a background of our findings in the following slides. So first, it's important that we look at current CFO sentiment to kind of set that foundation. Gauging CFO sentiment has been pretty tricky over the past few years, considering all the volatility. We've done quite a bit of research on the subject, and our conclusion is that CFOs are looking towards 2024 with a bit of cautious optimism. Throughout the second half of 2023, we saw expectations for a recession decrease pretty significantly from the first half of the year. And if we look at the discussions from Davos, it seemed that a lot of the experts and business leaders there at the conference did not believe that the US would fall into a recession this year. Now, in terms of how this specific agenda for 2024 was created, it's primarily based on presentations from finance leaders and experts at Suite World 2023, which is NetSuite's annual user conference, which was just held this past October. We also took the opportunity at the conference to conduct a survey on AI, which had 513 respondents. So you'll see some of the findings from that in this webinar as well. All right, so first let's go ahead and dive into a major theme that we saw at Suite World, which was automating the fundamentals. Now, the accounting profession is facing a pretty significant staffing crisis. More than 300,000 US accountants and auditors have left their jobs in the past 2 years, according to the Wall Street Journal. And that marks a 17% decline in the number of accountants and auditors in the profession. Accounting's image problem means that not enough new professionals are entering accounting to make up for those that have left. So moving forward, you're going to need automation to both make up for that shortage, but also to attract and retain talent. So one of our accounting partners, Flowcast, they did a great survey about this last year. And they found that more than 60% of accountants reported that technology is more important to their job satisfaction today than it was 2 to 3 years ago. And 43% were extremely likely to ask about technology in a job interview. Some of the key, really impactful areas to automate include the financial close and bill processing. So when accountants aren't stuck mindlessly matching transactions and trying to find missing documents, they have a lot more time to focus on strategic work, which was something that accountants in the Flowcast survey expressed strong interest in. And it lets companies finalize the financial results faster, which means that you actually have time to analyze the results, not just get them right. So the other areas where we saw a lot of emphasis on automation are fraud prevention and compliance. So 51% of companies in PwC's 2022 Economic Crime and Fraud Survey said that they had experienced fraud in the last 2 years, which is the highest level in all their years of research. With fraud on the rise, separation of duties becomes even more critical. And separation of duties, it makes it much harder for employees to perpetrate and conceal errors or fraud because no one controls an entire transaction from initiation to execution to reconciliation, not in the normal course of work at least. So while the concept in itself is simple, it can be difficult to enforce, particularly in larger or faster growing organizations with higher increasing transaction volumes. We've seen that happen to several companies in the past couple of years where they don't even realize it until it's hit millions in losses. So you can protect your company's assets by designating clear roles with specific permissions and restrictions, and you check on those and update those user permissions regularly and make sure the access rights are updated as well. So your finance and accounting system, it should let you provision employees with the least amount of access required to do their jobs. We're also seeing an increase in regulation, which of course means an increase in compliance requirements and huge amount of spend in this area. But the common culprit that tends to work against that investment is the spreadsheet. Manually tracking compliance nowadays, it really needs a lot of collaboration and agility and accuracy, and a spreadsheet, it's not quite going to cut it. You really need a system that is built to handle these increasingly complex regulatory, operational, and compliance challenges. And that means a software that receives frequent updates as data and situations relevant to the requirements change. And as regulatory requirements grow, compliance procedures such as automated controls, security scans, customized approval workflows, and always-on audit trails can help reduce that risk without increasing headcount. Now, surprise, surprise, of course, no presentation would be complete without at least some mention of AI in today's landscape. But we also cover a few other technologies that tend to be overlooked considering the buzz around AI. But before we dive in, we have our first poll question. How important will new or increased AI adoption be to your company over the next year? A, the most important thing we'll do. B, very important. C, somewhat important. D, not important. E, we won't do it. So Ian, this is actually a question that we asked as part of our AI survey at SuiteWorld. And judging by that, I think we're going to get a lot of C's, the somewhat important, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something everyone's aware of and thinking about, but whether they're actually adopting it, I think is the question, especially with the NetSuite audience that we were surveying, a lot of mid-market businesses. And so I think that those companies are still kind of finding their way a little bit, figuring out how do we use this? What are the actual practical applications we can have? So yeah. But it'll be interesting to see how these results compare to our survey results, because, slightly different audience, maybe slightly different types of businesses in here. And I think the type of business and the size of your business definitely impacts how you're looking at AI.
Yeah, agreed. All right. I was slightly right, but not completely. We got 38%. It's somewhat important, but the most hanging out at B, very important, which I think is refreshing to see.
Yeah, and it could be just sign of the times, right? It's only been a couple months since our survey, but I do feel like these things are moving so quickly that opinions and priorities around AI, possibly even shifted a little bit since then. So,
agreed. All right, so let's see if it will switch. There it goes. Okay, so you can actually see some of the findings that we had at SuiteWorld here, and a little, almost just a complete reversal there, which is kind of cool. Switching to the very important. But at SuiteWorld, we actually had Martin Kahn, the president and CEO of enterprise AI provider Cohere, present. So not only is Cohere using NetSuite to scale its business processes, but NetSuite is actually using Cohere's large language model technologies to build new generative AI capabilities for our offerings. And Kahn had a very salient message at SuiteWorld: pick something and start with it. So businesses that can quickly find practical uses for generative AI will quickly gain a sizable advantage. And that was the case for a lot of the technological breakthroughs we've seen throughout history, such as the cloud, mobile apps, the internet, and I think we're going to see history repeat itself with AI. Yet our research from SuiteWorld, like we said, it kind of showed that mid-sized businesses were falling behind a little bit. And as I said, it was kind of heartening to see in the poll here that that's kind of changing course. But I think the reason why we saw some mid-sized businesses feel a little hesitant in that time about adopting AI is the issue of finding practical uses, practical being the key word here. Ultimately, a lot of the companies, they aren't going to have the resources to totally overhaul everything and become this AI-driven business in one go. Instead, it's all about encouraging experimentation and the idea of starting small and applying AI where success will actually matter to the business. So using generative AI embedded in business apps is a great way to go about that. It's a very affordable way to start because these apps actually have the infrastructure needed to perform, and they're pretty narrow in focus usually. So it's not going to require some major overhaul to your business to do so. So good apps will also be able to incorporate your own data so you avoid common pitfalls that we've seen. We saw that in Boston Consulting Group's study. They tested OpenAI's ChatGPT 4 model, and they found that the model boosted creative product innovation by 40%, but it actually negatively impacted problem-solving performance by 23%. So what does that all mean? It basically means that models based on massive amounts of publicly available data have clear limitations when it comes to understanding the nuances of your own organization. That's why training existing AI models on your data to help refine them for internal use holds such promise. However, before we get too into this idea of AI, people want to skip straight to the cool stuff, right? But don't forget to use automation as a foundation, because there are levels of intelligent automation and you have to start at the ground floor. So advanced technologies, they're commonly being embedded in business applications. So for CFOs specifically, one of the key benefits of these systems is their ability to recognize, interpret, and classify business documents, storing their contents as data. So for instance, accounts receivables and payables, they will actually use automation systems with these technologies to digitize and classify paper and digital invoices. So that's actually an example of something called robotic process automation, or RPA. So RPA is considered process-driven automation. You can see that in the first two levels there. And that uses business rules to accomplish tasks like capturing receipt images, classifying expenses, and enforcing reimbursement rules. And that's very different from data-driven automation, which are those second two levels, which is a more advanced level of intelligent automation that depends on machine learning and artificial intelligence to offer insights and guide decisions. So like I said, as tempting as it might be to skip those first two steps, you can't actually skip straight to the advanced levels of automation. You can't skip that process automation phase because that's where systems are taught the business rules to follow around the data. So many teams spend a lot of times executing repetitive tasks, whether it's managing accounts receivables or payables, three-way matching expenses, running payroll, closing the books, or many other of those like monthly functions. Automation is an affordable way to save a tremendous amount of resources while enforcing your business processes. It's also key to retention because, let's face it, your talent doesn't want to be stuck doing mundane tasks that can and very well should be automated. Not only is it helpful for these reasons, again, it's also essential for AI because AI systems can only work with digital data. All right. And now speaking of technology, another large theme that we wanted to touch on that we heard at Sweet World was this theme around competitive intelligence. So 87% of businesses believe that their market has become much more competitive in the last 3 years. Sorry, more competitive in the last 3 years, with 49% characterizing it as much more competitive. And that's according to a report by the Strategic Consortium of Intelligence Professionals. So that's dialed up the pressure on companies to constantly improve, and they need to know how they stack up against industry standards. And that kind of broad industry benchmark data, it can be very expensive and difficult to get. The good news is that compiling that information should soon be easier with the development of tools like NetSuite Benchmark 360, which is a new feature of NetSuite that our founder, Evan Goldberg, announced at SuiteWorld. So for companies that opt in, it's going to go ahead and it's going to allow NetSuite customers to see the performance on metrics like days sales outstanding, revenue per full-time employee, and days cash on hand, how they stack up against anonymous data from peers in their industry and region. All right, with that, I'm actually going to switch it back to Ian for a bit.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Megan. So next we're going to cover some emerging regulations. A lot of these you might know of, or at least you remember hearing about them, but I think a refresher never hurts, and maybe this will give you a little bit of a different outlook on how these actually impact your business and what you can be doing now to get ready for them as they start to take effect. So not want to go? There we go. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is around ESG. So we've been hearing about ESG regulations, or at least the potential for them, for quite a while now, I think. And particularly, I wanted to focus on the E and ESG environmental stuff and tracking your carbon footprint. So for companies in the US, the SEC had a rule proposal on climate disclosures that requires them to disclose climate-related risks that are likely to have, quote unquote, a material impact on your business. And then you also need to kind of explain how you're evaluating those risks. So how are you deciding what these risks actually are and why they matter to your business, and what are you doing to manage them or mitigate them? So those are all things that public companies, again, this is the SEC, so we're talking about US public companies here, will have to start including in their reports at some point. It is a proposal, right? So that's important to keep in mind. As part of this proposal, companies are also going to have to report on their greenhouse gas emissions from their owned operations, meaning your own stores, warehouses, what offices, whatever facilities you own, manage, and operate, or not necessarily own, but manage and operate. But it also includes what are called Scope 3 emissions, which is quite a bit more complex and therefore also a more kind of controversial part of this. So Scope 3 emissions cover your supply chain, not including suppliers, vendors that you work with that aren't actually managed and run by you, as well as product consumption, potentially. So how your customers are actually using these products once they're in their hands. That is obviously very hard stuff to track down. That's why it's kind of controversial. The Scope 3 emissions, again, in this proposal, only apply when they're, again, quote unquote, material, or if your company has set public reduction targets, like we want to be net zero by 2035, or cut emissions by 50% in the next 10 years, or whatever it might be. So this proposal was announced almost 2 years ago, back in early 2022, and CFOs are still waiting for the SEC to finalize them, but I think this could be happening in the next few months. In December, the SEC pushed back the potential finalization to March of this year, so just a few months away now. But do keep in mind, this is only going to impact public companies, and the SEC has already said that it'll be phased in over years. So the requirements will likely start out a little bit looser and not require as much work from you to kind of comply with, and then get more comprehensive and require more work from you to comply with as these laws take effect and kind of start to be things that companies actually have to comply with. There could also obviously be legal challenges once the SEC does finalize these proposals, and that could slow things down as well. But all this is to say, I do think it's something that should be on your mind, that you should be thinking about, how are we going to deal with this? In addition to that SEC law, California has actually passed 2 disclosure laws. They did this just back in October of 2023. The California laws require that you disclose your greenhouse gas emissions as well as climate-related risks. So kind of similar to the SEC proposal on this issue. The California laws take effect in 2026, but for the 2025 year, so coming up pretty quickly here. And they apply to private and public companies that have at least $1 billion in revenue. So obviously only large companies, but it does expand beyond public companies, which makes it a little bit different than the SEC rule. The California laws also do include a provision on the scope 3 emissions that I mentioned about your suppliers and customers and all that stuff that's a little bit more distant from your operation. Those are going to kick in 2027 for the 2026 year. So you get an extra year for the scope 3 component of it, but this is an actual law that's on the books at this point. So this isn't kind of like a theoretical, or maybe this is what they'll do like it is with the SEC. I think the message here is that this is just the start of these regulations. More certainly going to be coming, honestly, on both sides of it. You can see the map here shows states that are considering or have passed both pro ESG and anti ESG legislation. So coming at it from both sides. But as more of those pro ESG laws, if you will, get put into place, they're going to be things that require a lot of effort and potentially changes to have to deal with. So that's why I think it's important to start preparing now, even if the SEC or California laws don't affect your business because you don't kind of fit the criteria for who these apply to. I think that more laws are coming and those are likely to impact you if these don't. So that's why I think it's important to start now. Second thing I want to talk about here is e-invoicing. So, e-invoicing, right, is just digital invoicing, right, which is pretty simple. But when we talk about e-invoicing, it's a little bit more complex than just scanning your invoices into a digital format or handling these things digitally. E-invoicing comes with certain standards around how your data needs to be formatted and how other other certain things you need to do to kind of meet a standard that's going to help different softwares, different systems send and receive and process invoices, both from one business to another, as well as between businesses and governments or tax authorities. So there are certain things you might need to do beyond just making them quote unquote digital. Why are countries doing this? As you see here, more than 80 countries have already passed these laws. The US is not one of them, but a lot of other countries around the world have. So it makes it a lot easier for governments to accurately and quickly collect taxes because this is all being automated and it's much easier for them to get the money that they're owed right away. I think it's especially relevant for value-added taxes. If you do any business in Europe, you're likely familiar with those and how complex those can be. And so I think that's an area in particular where e-invoicing can help and a reason they're kind of setting some of these laws into place. And that I think is a signal that more are going to be coming, right? If this is beneficial for countries and their tax authorities, that's a good reason for them to keep implementing these laws. I would say that there's definitely a benefit for you kind of on the business side as well. And that's that I think you can get bills out the door faster. You're spending less time processing them, dealing with them, and hopefully getting faster payments from customers. So, when those things go out right away to customers and they get automated reminders and things like that, that should encourage faster payment. So there is a benefit for you as well to adopting these as you potentially need to comply with some of these e-invoicing laws. All right, the next thing I want to talk about are some changes to tax regulations. So the first thing I'll talk about is research and development or R&D costs. This is likely something you've heard about, if not have already kind of dealt with firsthand. So this came as part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which took effect at the beginning of 2018. But this component of it didn't take effect until the beginning of 2022. And that change was that R&D tax costs had to be amortized over 5 years instead of businesses being able to immediately deduct them from their taxable income. So pretty big change there, pretty meaningful change. What this meant was that some small businesses got hit with really large and honestly, I think in a lot of cases, unexpected expenses in the form of tax bills. I've read a couple stories about small businesses that really owed quite a bit of money and way more than they had in the past because of this change of having to amortize them over 5 years. The table at the bottom here, I think, really highlights the impact of what this could look like. This might be kind of a dramatic example because we're looking at a company with $5 million a year in research expenses, research and development expenses. But over that 5-year period, they end up paying $1.5 million more in taxes. And that doesn't even account for the fact that each year you have less money available or potentially have to pay more in taxes because of the way they're being treated. So like I said, this is something that finance professionals have been aware of, I think, for years. But the thing is that a lot of people thought that this would be changed before it took effect, or even last year they thought maybe something will be passed retroactively, so that this, kind of goes back to the old way, or at least more of a medium between the old way and the new way. That hasn't happened yet. There is one important caveat here that just came up, and that's that Congress introduced a bipartisan bill last year that would restore the old R&D tax treatment, so where it would be immediately deductible. It is, something that hasn't been passed by the House or Senate yet, so we'll have to see how that plays out. The House could be voting on it as early as next week, so definitely keep an eye on that. But it's, as the chart shows here, and as you can imagine, this is something that can have a big impact on your available cash and kind of your financial planning and outlook for the future, with how these R&D expenses are treated. So definitely something for CFOs to watch and monitor, and then respond accordingly depending on how things kind of shake out in the next couple months here. The other thing I wanted to mention are potential changes to the tax code. So this is a little bit more unclear at this point, or speculative, if you will, because we don't really know what's going to happen yet. But a lot of provisions from, again, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the same law that brought those R&D changes, are set to expire at the end of 2025. A lot of these changes are going to impact people's personal taxes, but there are a few things that affect businesses potentially if things change or expire and aren't renewed. One of those is the deduction for pass-through income. So this is relevant to businesses structured, as LLCs, S corps, sole proprietorships, and partnerships. And it allowed companies that were set up that way to deduct up to 20% of their business income and therefore lower their tax liability. That may not be extended. Again, we'll have to see, but that is currently set to expire at the end of 2025, so in less than 2 years now. Another potentially even more impactful thing to watch is how multinational organizations are taxed. So if you do business in any country outside the US, this is, I think, something relevant to you. So 140 countries, which is a majority of the world, have adopted a framework from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, perhaps better known as OECD, that sets a global tax minimum. So that, even if the US doesn't join, this is something that could impact you if you operate or even just do business in other countries that have adopted the standard. We'll see if the US adopts it, but I think that if you do operate outside the US, this is something you need to be watching, regardless, because you could end up having to pay more taxes or taxes to people you haven't had to pay taxes to before, based on this new kind of global standard. All right, great. And then moving into my second kind of topic here is really on forecasting and looking ahead and figuring out what can you as a business, potentially change, do better, et cetera, to get a little bit of a better idea of what's coming and try to make your predictions a little bit closer to reality, which we all know is kind of always an uphill battle, but what are some changes you can make to hopefully improve those efforts? All right, so we have our second poll question here. Which of the following is your top priority for 2024? Is it smarter cash management, more frequent forecasting, better capital budgeting processes, or increased workforce visibility, or, sorry, one more option, more proactive insight into supply chain issues? I think cash flow and cash management has been all the talk for probably 2 years now since we started seeing interest rates go up. So I tend to think those are gonna be among the top choices here. But what do you think, Megan?
Oh man, I thought you were going to say scenario planning because that's your kind of bread and butter.
Yeah.
Or sorry, supply chain issues. I thought that's what you were going with.
Yeah.
No, I'm kind of biased towards cash management. I think that's kind of been a tough thing lately with inflation and cost of capital and everyone trying to grow but spend less. So that's what I'm going with. Maybe forecasting.
Yeah. I mean, these are all ultimately related to your money and financial position, but maybe some of them more directly than others, and that might be what people lean towards. So, yeah. Let's see here. Yeah, pretty close. So we had 47% say smarter cash management, 35% say more frequent forecasting, and everything else is way behind those two. So somewhat predictable, but yeah, those other three things definitely didn't get the same amount of love as cash management and forecasting. All right, so let's kind of dive into some of those topics that we just highlighted on the survey there. So the first thing I want to talk about is kind of how automation can help you when it comes to getting better insights and information on the forward-looking nature of your business. So Megan talked about automation earlier. It's obviously a big theme today. But the first area where I think it could help is with forecasting, and really this need to update forecasts frequently. Kind of like AI, people haven't stopped talking about how quote unquote unpredictable the economy is the last couple of years. We saw a big dive when COVID hit, then we saw a huge spike, and then we just kind of been, a little bit up and down. Since then, no one's really sure what's happening. And now, like Megan covered, people don't think there's as much of a chance of a recession as they did a year ago, even 6 months ago. Bottom line is that a lot of the patterns, kind of these established patterns for how the economy works and how things balance each other out, are not necessarily holding true. And that's throwing people for a loop. They're trying to figure out, what do I do? How do I manage my business in the best way possible based on that? I think that one way you can try to reduce the impact of this is to forecast more frequently. So you can see here that 36% of FP&A teams update their forecast weekly. That's according to Grant Thornton. But you might be sitting here thinking, well, yeah, but I don't have time to do that, right? That's a great idea, but how am I supposed to do that? So I think that then points to the need for a way to more efficiently create and update these forecasts. And that in turn is going to require, I think, a planning and budgeting system that's really capable and can, take in a lot of data, but also probably more importantly makes it really simple and easy to get the numbers that you need to see and update them frequently. Again, what do I think that looks like? I think your planning and budgeting system should pull data directly from your ERP system. If you're downloading data, uploading it, even using more manual methods like copying and pasting or typing in a number here and there, that's going to lead to problems. It's obviously not going to be very efficient either. So I think that a system that's able to pull that data directly over and update it as those numbers changed with, really just a click or two of a button can be a super big help, and make those forecasts not only faster, but also more accurate. Because again, you're not risking someone uploading data, manipulating it, etc. It's not going to be, I think, a totally human-free process, right? You're still going to need to tweak things, adjust things, but it's going to eliminate a lot of that manual work so that you can really just change what you want to change to see what would the impact be if our sales drop by 10%, if our expenses go up by 20%. On the positive side, maybe sales go up 20%, right? What does that mean for our business? So getting a sense of what that all looks like, I think, could be really powerful and help you plan for the future a lot more effectively. The other area automation can help with, I think, is cash management. And there's two ways where I see it helping when it comes to cash management, which, as we saw, was the top response in terms of what finance leaders and CFOs are focusing on. The first is kind of automating your receivables. So we talked about this a little bit with e-invoicing, but a system that can take care of the invoice creation and even sending it with minimal human interaction. Maybe a human just has to approve it, or only approves even invoices over a certain amount. That's going to help you, again, collect payment faster, I think, and lower your day sales outstanding, because those invoices are not sitting around. As soon as they're ready to go, the system is sending them out, and they're sending reminders and all those things that are going to facilitate faster payment. It obviously doesn't mean that all your customers are going to magically pay you on time, but I still think it's a step in the right direction that can help lower that DSO number. The second area I think it can help with is around cash flow metrics and projections. If these can just be automatically calculated and updated, again, big help to your business, right? If you're not trying to crunch numbers or make sure the data you're looking at isn't from 3 days ago and needs to be refreshed, if this is all happening automatically, it makes it a lot easier to get those insights and details that you need. Once you have that stuff in place, I think is when it really opens the door to some really exciting, more cutting edge cash management tools that can look at all sorts of stuff across your business around your current financial position and cash positions and really relevant details. For example, the invoices that we're expecting payment on soon, what's the payment pattern of those customers? Are they typically people that pay right on time? Do they usually pay 5 days late, 5 days early? What's the market look like, right? What's the trend we've been seeing with our overall payables, and how does that impact our projections on when we can expect to see this money? So really looking at a comprehensive view of your business, but the money coming in as well as the money going out as you pay other people, and provide recommendations. I do think this is an area where AI could come in a little bit because we're talking about really large amounts of data, trying to make really intelligent insights and kind of serve as an advisor to you. But I think once you have a system like that, or if you can access a system like that once it's available, it could be super valuable in really telling you, here's what you should be doing based on everything we're seeing about your business. For example, do you have longer payment terms with a vendor that you aren't fully taking advantage of? Maybe you're getting a 5% discount, right, for paying a week early, but the system might tell you that doesn't really make sense. Like it's not worth that 5% discount to pay them 5 days or a week early. It might say that you should borrow against your receivables, to cover a cash shortage in a few weeks, and based on the interest rate that you can get to do that, it makes sense to do this, and we think you can repay it in this time. And so, again, taking all that stuff into account, that's very hard for a human to, kind of look at all those different variables. But I think all these things can help boost your cash flow. And so I do think once you have those kind of first couple things figured out and automate some of those more fundamental steps, I would say, then you can start looking at these really cool tools that I think we'll see more and more of as we see technology continue to improve and evolve and things like that. All right, and then other topic I want to talk about is just kind of keeping a close eye on your numbers. Nothing new, but there's a couple areas I want to dig into within this. So the first is trying to watch your supply chain and look out for disruptions and hopefully get as early warning as possible about any potential disruptions. So obviously the earlier you know, the better, right? You could stop placing orders for a certain good if you know it's out of stock or it's going to be super delayed, and find a replacement. And I think that perhaps most importantly, you can set expectations with your customers. So you can, tell them, here's when we expect to have this, here's how it impacts you, and here's a replacement. I think that kind of being able to be proactive and update them as soon as possible and as early as possible is a super valuable aspect of having that early warning of potential problems. Supply chain is also obviously a major cost center, as any finance executive knows, and early warning is going to help you avoid those stockouts and overstock situations that both hurt your bottom line. We saw both sides of that over the last couple of years. First, there was all this unmet demand for products. Then people ordered all this stuff. The companies, I should say, ordered all this stuff, thinking customers would want it, and then suddenly were left with too much stock, had to discount it, unload it kind of cheaply. So finding that middle ground based on, again, what we're seeing is going to happen, I think can be really powerful. How do you get this? How do you get this early warning? Well, I think that having all your critical data in one place is a really key component of it. So that means data from across your supply chain, your sales, your customers, things like that can be really powerful because it's bringing that all together. You're not trying to figure out, here's what's out of stock. Okay, what customers have that item? It's helping you see those connections. To give you an example of what this might look like, imagine a sales rep is preparing a quote for a customer for a product that's configurable and has all sorts of options that they have to choose. And as they're building that quote, they make a selection on one aspect of the product and see that there's actually a shortage of that particular component. Rather than sending that quote off to the customer without knowing that it's out of stock and then having to go back to them a week later and say, oh, whoops, we actually don't have that. Let me see what else I can find. And I imagine that's going to cause some frustration on the customer's end as well. You're seeing it right then and can immediately find a potential replacement for that component that you were going to include. So I think that that's a good example that highlights how valuable this could be. The last thing I'll say here is that I think, again, AI, not to keep bringing that up, but I do think AI has the potential to greatly improve these predictions about what could happen to your supply chain, because again, it can just process these vast amounts of data. So we're talking about things like weather forecasts. What are the latest lead times on container ships? How long are they taking to get from China to the West Coast or from Europe to the East Coast? And what are demand trends that we're seeing across an entire industry? How do those impact, how we should be planning and buying goods for, for the future? And then I think it could even potentially assign confidence ratings to those predictions, whether it's low, medium, high, or a certain percentage, to give you a sense of how likely do we think this to happen, then how does that affect our planning as well? So you still need that human insight, but it can provide a lot more information and data and details that I think are really going to help you make more informed decisions that help the business. Last thing I'll cover here is around workforce visibility and really just controlling your payroll costs. So you can see on the right there that compensation costs for private industry workers was up almost 10% from 2021 to 2023. That's from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Very significant jump there in just 2 years, right? And then more recently, in a December survey from the National Federation of Independent Businesses, 29% said that either labor quality or labor cost was their top problem in December. So that's just highlighting this is still an issue. The labor markets may be loosened up a little bit, but it's still a problem for a lot of companies, or a challenge for a lot of companies out there. What do businesses need to do in response to that? I think they need to be especially vigilant when it comes to time tracking, scheduling, and their staffing levels. Mistakes are just that much more costly when your labor costs this much more, and it's that much harder to find a replacement or to find a new employee to fill a role in your business. Again, I'll say what Megan said earlier, avoid spreadsheets and also avoid disconnected systems to handle this stuff. So let's say you have payroll, workforce management, your HR records, and information on employees. That should all be unified or at least tightly integrated as much as possible, because it's going to help avoid those oversights that are going to cost you money. If you have all your staffing and scheduling across multiple locations, or even just one location, if you just have one location and one system, that's going to help you spot potential problems before they end up hurting you. For example, you could see that a shift is going to push someone into overtime because they'll hit over 40 hours, and therefore you're paying them time and a half. You can also avoid overstaffing. If you're a restaurant and you're usually slow from 2 to 5, you might only need 2 employees at that time instead of 3 or 4. It can also give coworkers the ability to easily swap shifts, which I think is just a nice perk for them, and something that could even help a little bit with retention. The last thing I'll talk about here is capital budgeting. So we all know capital is way more expensive than it was a couple years ago as the Fed keeps raising interest rates. It's perhaps peaked, but that's just speculation at this point. But even right now, the Fed funds rate is the highest it's been in more than 20 years, and that's just affected the viability of certain capital-intensive projects. The impact of that is shown by this Fortune survey. 88% of Fortune 250 CFOs increase their hurdle rate in 2024 due to those higher costs. So I think what you need is a way to quickly and accurately evaluate capital projects, compare here's what the cost and the potential profit or revenue that it would drive looks like, here's how long it's going to take, and then choose the one that's best for your business based on what you're seeing there. So yeah, with that, I'll pass it back to Megan, I think.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian. All right, so for one of our final sections here, we have empowering your teams. But before we do that, we're going to have our third poll question. All right, so do you agree or disagree with the following statement? My company makes excellent use of the data collected within the organization. And your options are strongly agree, somewhat agree, neutral, somewhat disagree, strongly disagree. This is something that we interviewed on probably about a year ago, and that's why we kind of wanted to test it out again, just to see how it progresses. It was something that companies were very confident about the data that they had collected, but they weren't confident that they were actually using it. So we're hoping to see that shift, but I know it's something that transitionally has been a little bit of an issue for companies.
Yeah, I feel like this is a question we could ask until the end of time. There's always opportunity for improvement, but yeah, like you said, the question is, are you using it well? Not just you have the good data, but yeah, I think it's one of those things, Megan, that is just like always an uphill battle for businesses, or at least certain businesses, and it's just constantly chipping away at it, trying to improve, trying to both have the right systems to get that data, and then also the right technology and people and skills to make use of it as well.
Exactly. And Rome wasn't built in a day, so.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. Let's see here. All right. Yeah. So we got a little bit of a tie. We're tied for second between neutral and somewhat disagree, which I kind of expected people to hang out at. But we got some somewhat agrees at 30%, so that's good.
Yeah, it seems like a positive sign. And those three are almost all the same numbers. We have 30, 28, 28. So yeah, but good to see that at least not too many are in the strongly disagree category, but also interesting that strongly disagree and strongly agree have about the same number. So again, always room for improvement, right? So it's hard to say I totally agree with this because we're doing everything we could with our data. So
Yeah, I think we're at the, I think so stage. All right, so getting into that a little bit, empowering your teams was a powerful theme at Sweet World, namely because, like Ian and I just said, the gathering of accurate, up-to-date data has been the priority. But data isn't valuable in itself, unless you're selling it. It's valuable for what it produces, actionable insights that help people make the right choices and find the best paths forward for their businesses. So Forrester, they found that 74% of companies, they want to be data driven, yet only 29% are actually successful at connecting analytics to action. So I think a lot of the issues that we see there are people are getting stuck in that collection phase and they don't actually have time to analyze it. So an ERP system that can bring data in from across the business into a single centralized database, that's going to prove to be a big assist in shifting away from that kind of gathering culture to more of a data-driven culture. And even better, if it has real-time dashboards that help it inform everyday decision making, so you can just look at a dashboard and say, oh, okay, based on this, I need to do this. That way, the task of compiling this accurate, up-to-date data doesn't come at the expense of analysis. There was also the question of training and access. So the best technology and data in the world, it doesn't make a difference if employees don't have access to it or they don't know how to use it. And so we've seen a couple examples of this from our actual NetSuite customers. So we had a healthcare logistics provider, MedSpeed, talk about how they were granting more general managers and others in operation leadership to directly access the financial data they need. So they are trained to do so. And that way they get what they want and they can just pull it as needed. Whereas finance doesn't have to just be like pulling stuff in the siloed organization and they have time to do more strategic tasks. And then Speedmaster, aftermarket automotive parts provider, they actually mentioned that they were putting more of a focus on training their employees in the technology. So they actually partnered up with NetSuite to put more emphasis on that training so people were able to use the system very quickly and also be able to use it very deeply, use all the different capabilities it provides. I did just want to end this section quickly with a quote from Gary Weisinger, which is a senior vice president here at NetSuite. He said, "Insight without action is just trivia," which I thought was particularly memorable as we look towards actually using the data, not just collecting it. All right, so let's just go ahead and kind of wrap up on what we need to get started with some of these themes that we laid out there and making these ideas a reality.
Yeah, for sure. So, ultimately we've kind of alluded to this or hinted at it, right? But accurate, comprehensive, and up-to-date data is really the starting point for any of these things. Without that, none of this is actionable. It's just ideas. It's just trivia, right? To use Gary's quote there. To just quickly highlight a couple of things we've talked about today, you're not going to be able to have the data you need to help train some of these AI models or kind of build on them, if you will. You're not going to be able to see what do we need to do to comply with these changes to tax laws and these new regulations. And you're not going to be able to see what are the things that we could be doing better in terms of our workforce management to hopefully save some money and help us get through a very tight labor market. Tracking and reporting on all this data really comes down to, doesn't just come down to, but certainly a key part of it is having the right technology. And an ERP system is definitely a key part of that tech stack as we think about what tools do you need to get all this information. Why is an ERP system valuable? Well, it brings together information from all your departments: finance and accounting, operations, HR, sales, marketing, etc. Most of you probably use ERP systems. You have an idea of how they work, but keep in mind that you want the right system, one that's actually going to give you that data in real time and actually automate to the level that you're looking for and targeting in the future. And also look for a vendor that's going to support your growth and evolution and let you kind of add pieces here and there so that you're not trying to think when you make that initial investment, what might we need in 5 years, but rather what do we need right now to set the foundation for what we then need in 3 years and 5 years, etc. And last thing I'll say is just going back to the words from Martin Kahn, pick something and start with it. So he said it in reference to AI and businesses kind of figuring out how to leverage this technology. I think it's something that really can ring true and hold true across your entire business. No matter what stage you're at when it comes to data and automation and all these cool things, figure out where it makes sense to start and just build from there. It's always good to get the ball rolling, and then you can kind of keep pushing it downhill, pick up some momentum, and really start to do some, more cutting edge, interesting stuff that might kind of seem like a pipe dream right now.
All right, we have one more very, very quick poll. It's just, are you interested in learning more about Oracle NetSuite? If you hit yes, we'll go ahead and reach out, but if you hit no, no hard feelings. Won't hear anything from us. While we're waiting, I'll just kind of go over some of the final thoughts. So we really enjoyed being here today and presenting on this. It's something that we've been analyzing for a while, so we're glad that we get to present those findings to you. But I know that Ian and I are very chatty, so we only have a couple minutes for Q&A, so I want to just go ahead and hop in right there. We also recognize we're very chatty, so we went ahead and listed our contact info there. If you have any extra questions that we don't get to, or you think of them later, just feel free to reach out to Ian or I, and we're happy to answer your question or make sure we get it to someone who can.
Okay, we have some questions ready. The first one we have is, how can employees make the case for investing in new technology when executives remain focused on cutting costs?
Yeah, I can take that one. I think it really comes down to focusing on how is this technology going to save us money and making the business case that way. If you look at some surveys and stuff, technology spending has maybe dropped a little bit, but it's still increasing year over year, even as we see all these cost reductions and cuts and everything. And so I think that points to the fact that the right technology can save you money. So really trying to look at it as what's the actual use case for this and what impact is it going to make on the business and our costs, and trying to frame it that way when you're talking to executives and decision makers and the people that might hold sway over these things.
The next question we have is, what can companies do right now to start preparing for coming regulations that require them to track emissions?
Yeah, I can take that as well. So it's a very big effort, and I don't want to underestimate that, but that's also, I think, why you need to start now. I think in a lot of cases, you're going to need specialized help from some sort of consultant, some sort of group that really knows how this stuff works and has had success helping other companies track these things. Some areas like Europe already have these laws in place, and so they've likely had experience helping companies in other places actually get this up and running, but it's going to require some specialized technology, at least for the time being, and definitely some new processes, some new things you probably haven't really had to think much about before, and that's why I would again suggest turning to people that really understand this ESG stuff well and what you need to do to kind of get up to speed.
Another question is, what are some initial steps I can start taking to automate my AP process?
Yeah, so I think just making sure that you can kind of get everything as digitalized as possible. Automation works off of that digital copy, and just making sure that everything is formatted in a similar way so it can read it. There's kind of like a couple steps to build up to like the smooth automation that you want. But once everything is kind of standardized across and works with your specific system and follows those guidelines, that's where the automation is going to flow really smoothly.
Okay, and I think we can squeeze in one more. What areas of the business should we automate before looking at AI solutions?
Yeah, so I can take that one. I think the best way to start the kind of automation task is going for those tasks that are frequently done or done on a scheduled basis. So like the financial close, because that is something like we said that has high impact. It also happens so regularly that your system's going to be able to learn from it and kind of get better at it. So I would say things financial close, bill processing, AP and AR, those are going to be the really high impact areas to hit.
Okay, well, thank you all for connecting with us today, and a very special nod to Megan, Ian, and of course the entire NetSuite team. I'd like to think of this as just a start of a conversation. If something piqued your interest or you need clarification on points made, please connect with Megan and Ian. Also look for our post-event email, which will include a link to the full recording, the slide deck, contact info, and more information on NetSuite. This does conclude today's program. Until next time, stay well and stay connected. Thanks again.